So in this video, I'm going to walk through the process of optimizing some images, and I'm mostly going to stick to what I've asked you guys to do in this week's assignment, but I also want to talk about a couple of outliers and just show you kind of those examples. So the demographics that will, hopefully I've gotten to a lot of this in class, but just in case we don't get to all of it, I wanted to have this recorded, and you can also then go back to it later. So you might have seen these guys before. We've got some images of a lovely pupper. So these ones were taken on an iPhone a couple years ago, so they are a little bit smaller than you might get if you used your phone now. We got pupper in a hat. We got, by the way, another hiding pupper. Then we've got some mushrooms, and then we've got the stars of the show here. And these guys, as you can see, this is 3.2 megabytes. This guy is 4.8. 2.3 and 3.9. Now we've got two outlier images. One is this Unsplash image. So they're both from Unsplash, which is a royalty-free image site that you can download images from. And this one is something that maybe you'd want to use as like a background for your site. And this one isn't huge. This is actually at full size, which is 3,456 pixels by 5,184 pixels. It's only 599 kilobytes, mostly because it's a mostly white picture with some kind of dark grays and some blacks in here. And so that's not a lot of pixel information. And so, it's relatively small for its size. So we're going to take a look at that in terms of thinking about background for your site and how you might want to optimize that guy, as well as taking a look at this other huge image, and 7,820 by 4,399. This guy started off at 5.6 megabytes. And then you have the optimized version down here of 296. So we're going to talk about why that one is larger than what I have set you as your specifications. But we're going to start off by doing some of these wonderful, lovely dogs and also some mushrooms to get a sense of how we do it. And then we will have a look at our two outliers from Unsplash. So you're going to be working with an image much like this. Don't you love the cats on here? So as you can see, this is 33%. So it's a pretty big image. Let me zoom in at 100% so you can see our hidden friend and also the cool cats on this birthday cat. Gonna Command 0 to zoom back out. And the first thing I'm going to do is go into my image size. Now, what I've told you guys is we're going to want to be 800 pixels at its widest side. So for this guy, you can see our original dimensions, and thankfully we're in pixels already. Remember, we want resample to be on, and I'm going to go ahead and make this 800. Now, thankfully, this guy's checked, so it automatically is going to set the height and keep it in proportion, which is what we want. Now you can also see that it was originally this size and now the image size is a lot smaller. Go ahead and click OK. Now the resample automatic is what it's doing right now that has left my little spinny cursor. And now you can see that it stays at the 33%, but it made the image smaller. So now let me go ahead and zoom in. 67 and up to 100%. So now you can see this is 100% versus about that size was 33%. As an example, switching to some of the other photos that are also at 33%. Okay, well that's great. I can go ahead, I'm going to do the same thing for my mushrooms here. Edit image size, go ahead, remember. So we've got original image size 26.2. We're going to make this 800. You can see this guy's square, so it's automatically 800 square, resample, zoom. All right, back up. Okay, so now I've got these two guys set. Let's take a look at you. Image size, again, 800. Awesome. Now, just so you know, if I, zoom in a little bit further, you can start to see and get the pixelation because it has, in fact, interpreted and basically gotten rid of that data. So zooming in on our friends, it's not as obvious in maybe their faces, but you can see it in the tree a lot. And in fact, let me just go back to open. Let me zoom back out. And so you can see the kind of fine detail on the wood. And now it's a lot smaller. And you can see it's all pixely. So the idea is you don't want to ever set something, if you're setting 800 wide, where that image is going to need to be bigger than 800 wide. But most of our images on the internet, as we mentioned, 800 wide is huge. It's plenty big. So this gives you a sense when you see it at 100%, that's the actual size it would be on a website. You think about your average website, that would take up a good chunk of real estate on a page. That would be like a heading image or a hero image on like the New York Times, right? This is going to be pretty big. Most of our images on websites are going to be, more like that size. So 800 still gives us plenty of room. With that, let me bring you back up to 100%. And you see, and again, this is 800. This is a little bit smaller than maybe an Instagram post. Now, I've set those guys. Again, I'm going to ignore the outliers for a moment. But the next thing I want to do is I've made it pixel size smaller, but it's still probably going to be file size a little bit bigger than what we're looking for. So thankfully, we still have some of the kind of legacy means it's not a current not currently supported feature. But they have Save for the Web. They've left it around in Photoshop because it is actually quite useful, especially when you are trying to optimize file size. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save for Web Legacy. And what's so useful is this 2-up view. So what I want to note, you might get either original or optimized as the kind of default that pops up. Because I've used it before, 2-up is what's going to pop up. What is so useful about 2-up is that you're going to be able to see what the changes actually look like at 100% in your image. The image selected here is what's going to be outputted. And so then you can see, does it look the way you want it to? And you're going to be able to see things like size. So in this case, I don't want it to be a GIF. Now I'm going to stick with the JPEG. Now, what it's going to tell me is what compression level, what quality, and so then I'm starting to get a sense of size, and I get this size here. So my original image here is 2.44 megabytes. Now, this image on the right is 315K. That's with 60% quality and high quality. Sorry, words. You can also do things like adding a blur. If, for example, you're starting to find a little bit of pixelation, you can add a little bit of blur in. There's different things you can do in order to try to make it not appear too pixelated. And again, you can zoom in to see, is it adding any noise or any interference that you don't like? So in this case, I'm telling you, I want you to go all the way down to 100K. Okay, so what happens here? So now you can kind of see, I went to low from high to low. Now take a look at our friendly fire hydrant here. You can see a real drop off in quality, right? So, okay, let's try medium. Okay, medium, is it a happy medium? It's much closer. I'm not noticing too much difference here, but I'm still noticing a little bit. Now the other thing here, you can see what happens when I jump. Low is 10%, 93, okay. Medium, 30%. Okay, well, let me try 20. Okay, it's 137. It's getting closer. Let's try 15. All right, getting closer, 98.3. And again, it's not quite as bad. Try 16. Oh, that's close. So you can go ahead and see. Okay, now that's at 200%. I zoomed in because I wanted you to be able to see the drop off in quality. But at 100%, can you see a difference? A real noticeable difference between these two images. Not much. Little bit, specifically the fine details of this background. But if you're focusing on the dogs, which I hope you are. If you're not, I don't know what's wrong with you. If you're looking at the dogs here, you're not really seeing a big difference at 100%. So I'm happy with that, and I can go ahead and hit save. And that's what I really like, is that 2-up. And then you'll go ahead and I want to make sure I save it in the right place. So my web 1, Oh, that's the wrong one. So my class site, make sure that I go into this week, and I want to go in, it's the wrong week, and I want to add a new folder, image exercise, and then I'll save that. Okay, that's fine. Okay, close that guy. And again, I can do the same thing here with my mushrooms. So I'm just going to go through and just show you in this case. Again, we can see now this guy, I can go up a bit more. Now, again, I can't really see a difference. I can see a tiny bit of difference when I zoom in here, but really, this is doing a pretty good job. All right, again, hit save, and click OK. And then don't save your original. And again, you can see it in the eyes a little bit, in the nose, but because he's got such fine hairs, I think you kind of, your eye makes allowances. And last but not least, for our pupper images, and again, this is going to be very similar to the images that you take, presumably, in terms of what they're going to look like. Now this, again, you can start to see this has got a lot of data. There's a lot of color happening in here. The more color, the more data. You'll kind of notice that when we saw our nice marble pattern and it was a very small image. So this is then maybe more of a problem, because I'm going to have a real trouble getting this one under 100, and I don't want it to look terrible, which is what brings us to one of our other examples. So this is where, in this case, this image, it'd be really hard to optimize for the web and not have it be over 100K. And if that's the case, well, for your exercise, pick another image. But that's where there are going to be times when you're not going to want to stick to the under 100K rule that I was telling you. So here I've opened up the image that you have the kind of end product of here. And you can see this is relatively small and it does have some noise in it. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So this is an image similar to that last image of the dogs that has a lot of data and information. First off, you've got your sky here where there's some definite tones going on. We got a lot of dark images and a lot of color. That's going to make this file size large to start off with. So starting off, this is 5.6 megabytes, kind of similar to this guy who's 4.8. You'll notice that this is a little bit more uniform in color. We don't have those greens that really make it a difference from the kind of reds here. And so this is 3.2, and this is not, two-thirds larger. So similarly, this guy, 5.6 megabytes, pretty big. Now, part of that is, in fact, the size. So let's go ahead and make this 800 pixels wide. Okay. Now, you can see pretty small. Let me bring it back up to 100% here. Okay, awesome. So if I just do that, I'm just going to go ahead and save just to show you what, leaving everything the same. Okay, so now I've gone from 5.6 to 283. So that's pretty good. But it's still you want to go for under 100. So again, if I do the export save for web, can I get it to be under 100 and still look decent. And see, this is the problem. You start to run into some of that pixelation. Oh, I'm just using the down key, by the way, on my keyboard. So some images, you're going to notice that pixelation more than others. So this, you might want that to be a hero image. You might not want it to only be 800 pixels wide. So let's step it back. Maybe I want this to be a hero image and I want this to be 1000 pixels wide, or you know what, 1500. So it's going to be then hard for that to be undersized. So if that's the case, that's all right. As long as it's a conscious decision you make. So this is specifically not for this week's exercise. This week's exercise, pick an image that you know you can get to be under 100. But if you are doing a image that it's really important, it be good quality, and so for your recipe book site specifically, if it's over and there's a reason for it, then that's fine. So in this case, maybe this is going to be the hero image. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. It's 240K. And I want it to be high because it's the hero image. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call this Mountain Hero. It's fine. Now, I also want a thumbnail on this on the main page. This is very similar to your recipe book site. You might want a thumbnail image of your recipes image on your recipe page, but inside the actual recipe itself, you want it bigger. I'd actually do a new version that's smaller. So if I have this thumbnail, that one I want to be, maybe that one only needs to be 500 pixels wide, as it's going to be a thumbnail. So it's not 100%. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to export out a version that's specifically the thumbnail. And in this case, I'm fine, again, leaving it high because it's going to be very small. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save this as Mountain Thumb. Go ahead, do that. Okay, that's fine. So now I have two versions. One's going to go on my recipe page and one goes inside the recipe itself. And that way you're not making the recipe page load for forever, but you still have the larger version because it's important for you to have that there. Now, the other thing to think about are sometimes you have an image like this, which you want to be a background image. Now, it's already pretty small. That's terrific. At its full size, it's only 599K. But it's also absolutely massive. So thinking about the average size of our browsers, that's going to be way too big. Like, that's going to look weird as a background image. So again, think about the image size and what size you want it to be. So in this case, this is currently 3,456 pixels wide. Well, what happens if I make it 2,000? That's maybe a little bit better for thinking about a web page and maybe tiling, because then you can actually see that it's a marble pattern, and maybe that's more useful to us, or maybe you're going to turn it on its side. And then you can go ahead and you're not too worried about the size. So again, in this case, I want this to be a background image, so I do kind of want it to be small. But again, I'm not going to notice too much of a drop off in quality. You know, I'm going to go ahead and hit low. See what happens here. Let's see if I can get this under 50K. Now, as I'm getting closer to 50K, now I'm starting to notice a bit. The edge is looking a little bit blurry. I wonder what happens if I blur just a little bit. Now I just want to show you what happens. I can set the blur up. So you can see how you can see the blur visually at a certain point. But here it's starting to be like, okay, I can get the image down to a little over 50K. It doesn't look that different. So it's about balance. It's about balancing what it's going to look like versus the size. So this would load really quickly as a background image. You don't want something taking ages to load if it's a background image. So go ahead and say this is background. So I just want you to think and to be really conscious of your file sizes when you are making your images, and use that to allow you to look at your end product and what you started at and make sure that you're happy with what it looks like, but also balance against what it's doing on your page and what's really important and what size are you using it at. So balance all those things when you're working on your recipe book. For our exercise this week, I do want to make sure that you have the width at maximum 800 pixels and the size is under 100K. So if you can't get that with your image and not have it look terrible, choose a different image. But when you're making your website in the end, you need to think about balancing these different pieces.